Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're moving beyond the idealized romantic views of democracy and looking closely at what it actually delivers in the real world. We're constantly surrounded by debates about democracy, but right now, we're going to treat it like a report card. We're stripping away the romance and diving straight into the hard data, the tangible results, and the actual lived experiences of citizens.
Let's take a quick look at our agenda for today. We're going to start with assessing democracy, then move on to evaluate quality of government, economic outcomes, social diversity, and finally, freedom and dignity.
All right, Section 1, Assessing Democracy. Let's look at expectation versus reality.
To kick things off, we really have to acknowledge a super common feeling. We face this dilemma, right? Where democracy sounds absolutely brilliant in principle, but it can leave us feeling incredibly frustrated when we look at it in practice. Almost everyone says they prefer democracy over a dictatorship, but ask them about the democracy they actually live in, yeah, satisfaction drops way down. So this brings us to a fundamental question. Are we expecting way too much from our political systems? Our fascination with democracy often pushes us into a bit of a trap. We start treating it like a cure-all, a magic pill for every single socioeconomic problem under the sun. And when it doesn't immediately solve poverty or wipe out corruption overnight, we don't just get mad at the government. We start doubting the entire concept of democracy itself.
The visual we're looking at here brilliantly illustrates the immense, crushing pressure we place on democratic governments every single day. It's like a giant balancing act. You see the figure of democracy just trying to think, while massive boulders are literally being hurled at their head. One boulder is yelling about student demands, another wants to solve a border dispute, others are about language issues or police excesses. It perfectly captures how a democratic system is just constantly bombarded by competing and honestly, often explosive, public demands.
So, here's the absolutely crucial takeaway. Democracy is not a magic wand. It's just a framework. It provides the conditions for success, sure, but it can't actually do the heavy lifting for you. As citizens, we have to actively take advantage of those conditions to achieve our goals. Think of it this way. Democracy provides fertile soil, but it's not the harvest itself. Once we wrap our heads around that, we can start assessing it much more fairly.
Moving on to Section 2, Quality of Government, specifically looking at how accountable and responsive it is.
Let's break down the whole efficiency debate. You hear people complain all the time that democracies are agonizingly slow. And, well, they're right. Non-democratic rulers, they don't have to bother with messy deliberation or worry about public opinion. That makes them incredibly quick. But here's the catch, the trade-off. A dictator might make a lightning-fast decision, but if the people hate it, you're looking at massive friction down the line. Democracy's slow, procedural nature, because it's based on negotiation, ensures that decisions are ultimately more acceptable, more legitimate, and a lot more transparent. So that cost of time, that's just the price we pay for lasting effectiveness.
Okay, Section 3, Economic Outcomes. We're looking at growth and inequality.
This is where the data gets deeply fascinating, and honestly, a little uncomfortable if you're a huge fan of democracy. Looking at the hard numbers from 1950 to 2000, dictatorships actually edge out democracies with a slightly higher rate of economic growth overall. We're talking 4.42% compared to democracy's 3.95%. But hold on, before we panic and completely abandon the ballot box, we need some context. Economic growth depends on so many things, like population size, global situations, and available resources. If you zoom in and compare only the poorer countries under dictatorships and democracies, that difference in growth is virtually negligible. So, while democracy might not be a guaranteed VIP ticket to riches, it certainly doesn't inherently drag an economy down compared to the alternatives.
But we really need to look a bit closer here, because even more concerning than the overall growth rate is how wealth is actually distributed inside democracies. Historical data shows us that stark inequalities are just continuing to grow. It's a bit of a paradox, right? Democracies are literally built on political equality, one person, one vote. Yet running totally parallel to that political equality, we see this massive, growing economic inequality. A small number of ultra-rich individuals enjoy a highly disproportionate share of wealth, while the incomes of those at the very bottom are sometimes even declining. It makes it incredibly hard for them to meet just basic everyday needs like food, clothing, and shelter.
The harsh reality is that democracy alone does not guarantee a fair distribution of goods and opportunities. The dynamic we're looking at right now is wild. You have the vast majority of the global population trying to survive on a tiny little sliver of the world's resources, while a minuscule fraction feasts on basically the entire globe. Now, logically, since the poor make up a massive proportion of voters, you'd assume a democratic government would instantly try to fix poverty to win those votes, right? But in actual practice, democratically elected governments are often nowhere near as keen to aggressively tackle poverty as that majority rule logic would suggest.
Moving to Section 4, Social Diversity. Let's look at peace and harmony. This brings us to the social sphere, where we have to ask a highly relevant question for the world we live in today. Can democracies actually deliver a peaceful and harmonious life among deeply divided citizens? Look, no society can permanently, magically resolve all conflicts between different groups. That's just human nature. But democracy is uniquely suited to evolve mechanisms to negotiate those conflicts. However, to handle social differences without it turning into violence, there are some pretty strict conditions. First off, the majority always needs to work with the minority. It can't just be rule by majority opinion. Second, rule by majority absolutely cannot devolve into rule by a specific religious, racial, or linguistic community. And finally, every single citizen must have a realistic chance of being in the majority at some point in time, because if someone is permanently locked out just based on who they are, well, the system is no longer a true democracy for them.
What we see here represents the profound choice that societies face. On one side, we see what happens when political systems try to forcefully suppress internal divisions. It's like violently zipping two opposing sides together by force. It's incredibly tense, it's brutal, and honestly, it's bound to rupture eventually. On the other side, we have the democratic ideal. It's about evolving mechanisms to negotiate and accommodate differences, like a mutual handshake. It doesn't pretend the differences don't exist, but it bridges them through mutual consent rather than brute force.
And that brings us to Section 5, Freedom and Dignity, focusing on individual respect.
We've reached the climax of our evaluation, focusing on the human spirit. You might be wondering, if democracy struggles so much with economic equality, why is it still universally demanded? Well, here is your answer. While it might face immense challenges economically and administratively, democracy undeniably shines as the absolute ultimate guarantor of individual respect and freedom worldwide. Every single person wants to be respected by their fellow human beings. That passion for respect and freedom, that's the very foundation of democracy. Especially in societies that have been built for centuries on subordination and domination, simply legally recognizing that all individuals are equal, that is a huge, revolutionary achievement that no dictatorship could ever offer.
So, reviewing our report card today leaves us with a final thought to weigh based on all the profound evidence we've just unpacked. We've seen that democracy offers transparency, it accommodates social diversity, and it fiercely protects human dignity. Those are incredible moral victories. But it also prevents explosive social violence through negotiation rather than force, which is a highly practical, prudential benefit, even if its economic growth isn't miraculously higher than a dictatorship's. So I'm going to leave you with this to ponder. If democracy is just a framework that requires us to do the heavy lifting, are the current flaws we see a failure of the system itself or a failure of us, the citizens, to fully utilize it? Think about that for a while, and keep seeking the truth behind the systems that govern us.